The wheelchair squeaked against the linoleum floor as I rolled myself toward the window for what I thought would be the last time. My arthritic fingers gripped the armrests so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The same hands that had kneaded bread for Sunday dinners, braided my daughter's hair and held my husband's face when he took his final breath. Now they trembled as I stared at the lock on the door. They actually locked me in. The realization hit me like a physical blow. At 73 years old, after raising 4 children, surviving the death of my husband, and living through decades of joy and heartbreak, I had become a prisoner in a place that smelled of disinfectant and defeat. The aide had just left after what she called my evening medication routine. 6 pills that made my thoughts fuzzy and my spirit feel buried under cotton. Through the thin walls, I could hear Mrs. Rodriguez crying for her son again, the same son who hadn't visited in 8 months. Down the hall, someone was arguing with a nurse about wanting to go home. Home. The word felt foreign now, like something from a language I used to speak fluently but had somehow forgotten. I pressed my palm against the cool glass window, watching the parking lot below. Cars came and went, carrying people to lives I could barely remember having. People who could open their own doors, choose their own meals, decide when to sleep and when to wake. The wedding ring on my finger caught the fluorescent light. 52 years of marriage reduced to a thin gold band that now felt too loose on my shrinking finger. Richard would have never stood for this. He would have marched right into my daughter's house and demanded to know how she could abandon her mother like this. But Richard was gone. And I was here. How did I let this happen? The question burned in my chest as I sat in that wheelchair, surrounded by the sound of institutional life, the beeping of monitors, the shuffle of nurses' shoes, the endless television programs that nobody really watched. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the dinner cart rattling down the corridor, bringing another meal I didn't choose to a table I didn't want to sit at. I had survived the Great Recession, raised children through the chaos of the 60s and 70s, and buried the love of my life. But somehow I had ended up here, trapped in a place where my daughter thought I belonged, where my independence had been stripped away one small decision at a time. Not anymore. That night, as I sat by that window with my reflection staring back at me, I made a promise to myself. I was going to find my way back to the woman I used to be, even if it meant risking everything I had left. If this story is already stirring something in your heart, I'd love to know, what time is it where you are right now and which city or state are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Let's see how far this story is reaching. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and I want you to know that the lines on my hands tell stories that most people my age have forgotten how to share. These hands have changed thousands of diapers, written countless grocery lists, and held the steering wheel during family road trips in our old station wagon when gas was still under $1. They've worn wedding rings and worry rings, clapped at graduation ceremonies, and wiped away tears during funerals that seem to come too often after age 60. At 73, I'm old enough to remember when television programming ended at midnight with the national anthem, when you could buy a house for $15,000, and when families actually gathered around dinner tables without staring at screens. I remember the smell of my mother's Sunday pot roast, the sound of my children's laughter echoing through our 3-bedroom ranch house, and the way my husband Richard used to hum while he shaved every morning. I remember when I used to be somebody. Before the nursing home, before the medications that made me feel like I was swimming through molasses, before my daughter decided I was too much trouble to keep at home, I was a woman who made her own decisions. I chose my own breakfast, decided when to water my plants, and could walk to the corner store without asking permission. I had my own kitchen, a small galley with yellow countertops and a window that looked out onto the backyard where I'd grown tomatoes for 30 years. I had my own bedroom where I kept Richard's pillow on his side of the bed and where I could cry in private when the grief hit me like a sudden storm. I had my own life. The transition happened so gradually that I didn't notice it at first. After Richard died, my daughter Sarah started calling more often. Then she started stopping by every few days to check on me. Then she started suggesting that maybe I shouldn't be driving so much, that maybe I should consider getting some help with the housework, that maybe living alone wasn't the safest thing for a woman my age. Maybe. Each maybe was a small surrender, a tiny piece of my independence that I handed over without realizing I was giving up everything that made me feel like myself. The driving stopped first. Sarah convinced me that my reflexes weren't what they used to be. Then the cooking became too much work, so she started bringing over prepared meals. Then the housework became overwhelming, so she hired a cleaning service. And then came the fall. One Tuesday morning in October I slipped in the bathroom and bruised my hip. It wasn't serious, just a scare that left me shaken and sore for a few days. But by the time Sarah arrived that afternoon, you would have thought I'd been in a car accident. "Mom, this can't continue," she said, standing in my living room with her arms crossed, looking at me the way I used to look at her when she'd stayed out past curfew. "You could have really hurt yourself. What if you'd hit your head? What if you'd broken something? What if no one had found you for days? What if? I tried to explain that I was fine, that it was just a small accident, that I'd been living on my own for 3 years since Richard died and had managed perfectly well. But Sarah had already made up her mind. She'd already researched facilities, already scheduled tours, and already decided that her 73-year-old mother was no longer capable of making decisions about her own life. And somehow I let her. Sarah was my youngest, born when I was 35 and thought I was done having children. She came into the world during a snowstorm in January 1982, 3 weeks early and determined to do things her own way. Even as a baby she had opinions about everything: what she would eat, when she would sleep, how she wanted to be held. Richard used to joke that Sarah got her stubbornness from me, but I knew better. She got it from him. That quiet, relentless determination that could move mountains when properly motivated. As a child, she organized her toys by color and size, did her homework without being reminded, and always had a plan for everything. I was so proud of her. She became a nurse, married a good man named David, and gave me 2 beautiful grandchildren, Michael and Emma. For years, our relationship was everything I'd hoped it would be. She called regularly, visited often, and included me in family gatherings and holiday celebrations. But something changed after Richard died. At first I thought it was grief. Sarah had been Daddy's girl, and losing him hit her harder than she wanted to admit. Sarah had been Daddy's girl, and losing him hit her harder than she wanted to admit. She threw herself into taking care of me the way she'd always thrown herself into everything else, completely and without question. I should have seen it coming. The first sign was the way she started talking about me in the third person when we were with other people. "Mom's been having trouble with her memory lately," she'd say to her friends at church while I sat right there. "Mom's been forgetting to take her medications," she'd tell the pharmacist, even though I'd only missed 1 dose in 3 months. I wasn't disappearing. She was making me disappear. But I loved her and I trusted her, and I wanted to believe that everything she was doing came from a place of love. When she suggested that maybe I should consider wearing one of those medical alert necklaces, I agreed. When she wanted to install grab bars in my bathroom, I let her. When she thought it would be a good idea to have a key to my house just in case, I handed it over. Each concession felt reasonable. Each one felt like love. My other children lived farther away. Robert was in California, building his career as an engineer. Jennifer was in Texas, busy with her own family and her own life. Michael was in the military, stationed overseas. They called when they could, visited when they were able, but Sarah was the one who lived 20 minutes away. Sarah was the one who was available. Sarah was the one who had the power. The nursing home research started about 6 months after Richard died. Sarah brought it up casually one Sunday after church, mentioning that she'd driven past a really nice senior living facility on her way to work. "It's not a nursing home, Mom," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee at my kitchen table. "It's more like an apartment complex for older adults. They have activities, meals included, and medical staff right on site. It might be nice for you to be around other people your age." I wasn't ready to be around other people my age. I wanted to be around my own things in my own house with my own memories. I wanted to wake up in the bedroom I'd shared with Richard, make coffee in the kitchen where we'd had breakfast together for 30 years, and tend to the garden where his ashes were scattered beneath the rose bushes. But Sarah was persistent. She brought home brochures, scheduled tours, and started talking about the benefits of planned communities for seniors. She talked about safety and security, about having help available when I needed it, about the social aspects of living with peers. She never talked about what I would lose. The tour of Meadowbrook Manor happened on a Tuesday in March. Sarah picked me up in her car, chattering nervously about the facility's amenities as we drove across town. The building was modern and clean, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture in the lobby. The staff was friendly and professional, and the other residents seemed pleasant enough. Felt like a hotel where nobody ever went home. "What do you think, Mom?" Sarah asked as we walked through the halls, peering into rooms that looked exactly like each other. Doesn't this seem like a nice place to make new friends? I didn't want new friends. I wanted my old life. But I could see the hope in her eyes, the relief in her voice. She'd been carrying the weight of worrying about me for months, and this place represented a solution to a problem I didn't think I had. Maybe it would be easier for everyone if I just said yes. The fall happened 3 weeks later. Or maybe it didn't happen. Maybe I just became tired of fighting, tired of explaining why I wanted to stay in my own home, tired of being treated like a problem that needed to be solved. Maybe I just gave up. The day I moved into Meadowbrook Manor, Sarah helped me pack my belongings into boxes and suitcases. She kept saying how excited she was for me to start this new chapter, how much better she'd feel knowing I was safe and cared for. I never told her I felt like I was dying. The room was small but adequate. A bed, a dresser, a chair by the window, and a tiny bathroom. I was allowed to bring some personal items, so I chose carefully. A photograph of Richard and me on our wedding day, a small lamp from our bedroom, a few books, and the quilt my mother had made for me when I got married. Everything else got stored or donated or thrown away. That first night, lying in an unfamiliar bed surrounded by unfamiliar sounds, I realized that I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But by then Sarah had already signed the papers, already paid the first month's fees, and already told everyone that I was settled in nicely. By then it was too late to change my mind. Or so I thought. The first few weeks were a blur of orientation meetings, medication schedules, and activities designed to help me adjust to my new environment. I attended craft classes I didn't want to take, ate meals at assigned times, and went to bed when the staff decided it was appropriate. I was a patient instead of a person. But slowly I started to remember who I used to be. I remembered the woman who had raised 4 children largely on her own while Richard worked long hours. I remembered the woman who had learned to balance a checkbook, change a tire, and navigate a marriage through good times and bad. I remembered the woman who had never given up on anything in her life. And that's when I started planning my escape. The first month at Meadowbrook Manor, I tried to be the good patient everyone expected me to be. I attended the morning exercise sessions led by a perky 20-something named Jessica who spoke to us like we were children. I participated in bingo games where the prizes were travel-sized bottles of lotion. I ate the bland, overcooked meals at assigned tables with assigned tablemates. I was dying a little more each day. My tablemates were Helen, who repeated the same 3 stories about her grandson, Margaret, who complained about everything from the temperature to the television volume, and Dorothy, who hadn't spoken a complete sentence since I'd arrived. We sat together 3 times a day, making polite conversation about the weather and the food while our lives slowly evaporated around us. This is what Sarah thought I needed. The medication schedule was the worst part. Every morning at 7:30, a nurse would arrive with a small paper cup filled with pills. Blood pressure medication, arthritis medication, a multivitamin, and something called Ativan that was supposed to help with anxiety and adjustment. I'd never had anxiety until I came here. The Ativan made everything feel distant and foggy, like I was watching my life happen to someone else. When I mentioned this to the nurse, a tired-looking woman named Carol who'd been working at the facility for 12 years, she just smiled and said the medication would help me feel more comfortable. Comfortable. Like a piece of furniture. 3 weeks into my stay, I decided to skip the evening dose of Ativan. I wanted to think clearly, to feel like myself again, even if it was just for one night. I palmed the pill when Carol wasn't looking and flushed it down the toilet. The difference was immediate. Without the medication clouding my thoughts, I could see my situation clearly for the first time since I'd arrived. I wasn't a confused old woman who needed to be managed. I was a grown adult who had been systematically stripped of every choice that made life worth living. I was still me. That night I called Sarah from the phone in my room. "Mom, you sound different," she said, and I could hear the concern in her voice. "Are you feeling okay? Do you need me to come over?" "I'm fine, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've just been thinking. Maybe this place isn't the right fit for me. Maybe I could try living on my own again with some help if you think that's necessary." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I thought the call had been dropped. "Mom," Sarah finally said, and her voice had that careful, patient tone she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. "We've talked about this. You're safe there. You're getting the care you need. Dr. Patterson thinks the environment is perfect for someone at your stage." My stage? Like I was dying. "What if I don't want to be safe?" I asked. What if I want to make my own mistakes and live my own life? Mom, you fell. You could have been seriously hurt. You weren't taking your medications properly. You weren't eating regular meals. This is what's best for you. Best for me. Or best for her. Sarah, I'm 73 years old. I've been making my own decisions for more than 50 years. I think I've earned the right to choose where I want to live. You're not thinking clearly, Mom. The stress of Dad's death, the move. It's been a lot. Give it time. You'll adjust. I didn't want to adjust. I wanted to live. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my chair by the window and watched the parking lot until the security lights came on. Cars came and went, carrying people home to their own beds, their own kitchens, their own lives. I was going to get mine back. The next morning, I refused the Ativan again. And the morning after that. By the end of the week, Carol had noticed. Mrs. Hayes, you seem agitated lately, she said, standing by my bed with the medication cup. Dr. Patterson might want to adjust your dosage if you're having trouble with anxiety. I wasn't having trouble with anxiety. I was having trouble with captivity. I don't want the Ativan anymore, I said simply. I don't like the way it makes me feel. Carol frowned, making a note on her chart. That's not really your decision to make, Mrs. Hayes. Your daughter and Dr. Patterson have prescribed a specific treatment plan for you. If you're having side effects, we can discuss alternatives, but you can't just stop taking your medications. I couldn't just stop taking my medications. That phrase echoed in my head for the rest of the day. I couldn't choose my meals, I couldn't choose my schedule, I couldn't choose my activities, and I couldn't even choose what to put in my own body. When did I stop being a person and become a patient? That afternoon, during the mandatory social hour in the main lounge, I struck up a conversation with a man named Frank who'd been at Meadowbrook for 2 years. He was sharp and funny with kind eyes and a mischievous smile that reminded me of Richard. The trick, he said quietly while we pretended to watch a game show on the television, is to make them think you're cooperating while you figure out your real plan. Frank had a plan. What kind of plan? I whispered back. The kind that gets you out of here, he said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. But you have to be smart about it. You can't just announce you're leaving. They'll find ways to stop you. They could stop me. That night, Frank explained how the system worked. Family members signed contracts that gave facilities certain rights over residents, especially residents who were deemed vulnerable or at risk. Medical professionals could recommend continued care, and insurance companies preferred the predictability of institutional settings. I was trapped by paperwork and good intentions. But it's not impossible, Frank said. You just have to be strategic. You have to show them you're competent, you have to have a plan for independent living, and you have to be persistent. I could be persistent. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. I noticed which staff members were sympathetic and which ones saw residents as problems to be managed. I learned the schedules, the routines, the unspoken rules that governed our days. I was doing reconnaissance. I also started keeping a journal, documenting everything that happened to me each day. The medications I was given, the activities I was required to attend, the conversations I had with staff and family members. I wanted a record of my experience, proof that I was thinking clearly and making rational decisions. Evidence. The second incident happened in November. I'd been at Meadowbrook for 6 months, and the routine had worn me down to a shadow of myself. I was sitting in the dining room staring at a plate of gray meat and overcooked vegetables, when something inside me just snapped. I stood up and walked out. Not out of the building, that required keycards and permissions I didn't have. But out of the dining room, down the hall, and into the small garden area where residents were allowed to sit when the weather was nice. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to feel human. Within 10 minutes, 2 staff members had found me. Mrs. Hayes, you can't just leave the dining room without telling someone, said Jennifer, one of the newer aides who always spoke a little too loudly. We were worried about you. They were worried about their liability. I wasn't hungry, I said simply. I wanted to sit outside. But it's November, Mrs. Hayes. It's cold out here. And you left your sweater in your room. I was perfectly capable of deciding whether or not I was cold. I'm fine, I said. I'll come inside when I'm ready. Jennifer exchanged a look with the other aide, and I could see them trying to decide how to handle this situation. In the end, they convinced me to come inside by promising to bring me a cup of tea and let me skip the afternoon activity if I wanted to rest. I was being managed again. That evening Sarah called. The staff told me you had some kind of episode today, she said, and I could hear the worry in her voice. They said you seemed confused and agitated. I wasn't confused. I was angry. I wanted to sit outside for a few minutes, Sarah. That's not an episode. That's a perfectly normal human desire. But Mom, it's November. You could have gotten sick. And you worried the staff when you just disappeared from the dining room. I didn't disappear. I walked 20 feet down the hall. I'm not a child, Sarah. I don't need permission to move around. But you do, Mom. That's how these places work. They need to know where everyone is for safety reasons. You signed an agreement when you moved in. I didn't remember signing anything that said I couldn't walk down a hallway. Maybe I should come visit this weekend, Sarah continued. We can talk to Dr. Patterson about adjusting your medications if you're feeling restless. Restless. Like a caged animal. After we hung up, I sat in my chair and thought about what Frank had told me. I needed to be strategic. I needed to show them I was competent. I needed a plan. I needed to document everything. The third incident was the one that changed everything. It was a Tuesday in December and I was having one of my better days. I slept well, ate breakfast without forcing myself, and even enjoyed the morning exercise session. During the afternoon free time, I decided to walk to the lobby to look at the Christmas decorations. I'd forgotten to tell anyone where I was going. The lobby was beautiful. A large Christmas tree covered in gold and red ornaments, garland draped along the reception desk, and soft holiday music playing in the background. For a moment, standing there in that decorated space, I almost felt normal again. I almost felt free. I was admiring the tree when I noticed the front doors. They were heavy glass doors with electronic locks, but during the day they opened automatically when someone approached from the inside. I watched a delivery man leave, watched a family member arrive, watched the doors open and close with smooth efficiency. I walked toward them. I wasn't planning to leave. I just wanted to see if I could. I wanted to know if I was a resident or a prisoner. The doors opened. I stepped outside onto the covered entrance area and took a deep breath of cold December air. It was the first time I'd been outside the building unsupervised since I'd arrived, and the freedom of it was intoxicating. I could leave. Right now I could just walk away. But I didn't. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, breathing the fresh air and watching cars drive past on the street beyond the parking lot. Then I turned around and walked back inside. The lobby was in chaos. 3 staff members were clustered around the reception desk, talking in urgent, hushed voices. One of them was on the phone. Another was checking the guest book. The third was scanning the lobby with obvious concern. They were looking for me. Mrs. Hayes. Jennifer spotted me first. There you are. We've been looking everywhere for you. I'd been gone for 5 minutes. I was just getting some fresh air, I said, confused by the level of concern I was seeing. You can't just leave the building without telling someone, Carol said, appearing from somewhere behind the reception desk. We have protocols for a reason. If something had happened to you out there. What could have happened? I was standing on a covered porch. I was right outside the front door, I said. I wasn't lost. I wasn't confused. I was just breathing. But they weren't listening to my explanation. They were already implementing their protocols. Escorts to my room, incident reports to be filed, family members to be called. I was being treated like a flight risk. That evening Sarah arrived with David. They both looked worried and tired, like they'd been discussing this situation for hours. Mom, you can't just wander off like that, Sarah said, settling into the chair across from my bed. The staff was terrified. They thought you might have gotten lost or confused. I walked 20 feet and stood still. What if you'd fallen? What if you'd wandered into traffic? What if you'd gotten disoriented and couldn't find your way back? What if? Sarah, I walked outside and stood on the porch for 5 minutes. I wasn't confused. I wasn't lost. I was exactly where I intended to be. David leaned forward, trying to be the voice of reason. Mom, we understand that you're feeling cooped up. But there are procedures here for a reason. If you want to go outside, you just need to let the staff know so they can arrange supervision. Supervision. Like a child or a criminal. I don't want supervision, I said, and I could hear my voice getting stronger. I want to be able to step outside my front door without asking permission from strangers. Sarah and David exchanged one of those looks that married couples share. The kind that communicates entire conversations without words. They'd already decided how this was going to end. Dr. Patterson thinks it might be a good idea to adjust your medications, Sarah said carefully. Something to help with the restlessness and confusion. I wasn't confused. I was angry. And maybe we should look into moving you to a different wing of the facility, David added. Somewhere with more structured activities and closer supervision. More structured. Closer supervision. That night after they left, I lay in my narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. In the hallway outside my room, I could hear the familiar sounds of institutional life. The squeak of wheelchair wheels, the murmur of late-shift conversations, the electronic beeping of some machine I couldn't identify. This was my life now. Or was supposed to be. But I wasn't dead yet. The fourth incident was the one I planned. I'd been thinking about it for weeks, ever since my conversation with Frank and my brief taste of freedom on the front porch. I needed to prove to myself, and to everyone else, that I was still capable of making my own decisions. I needed to prove I was still alive. It was a Thursday in January, almost a year since I'd moved into Meadowbrook Manor. The snow was falling outside my window, covering the parking lot in a clean white blanket that made everything look fresh and new. I was going to walk to the corner store. It was a simple plan. The store was 3 blocks away, a distance I'd walked thousands of times during my life. I would buy something small, something that proved I'd been there, and then I would walk back. I would prove that I could take care of myself. I waited until after lunch, when the staff was busy with afternoon medications and the afternoon shift change created a brief window of distraction. I put on my warmest coat, slipped my purse over my shoulder and walked calmly toward the front lobby. The doors opened for me. The cold air hit my face like a slap, but it felt wonderful. Honest. I pulled my coat tighter and started walking toward the street. I was free. The walk took longer than I expected. The sidewalks were partially cleared but still slippery in places, and I had to move carefully to avoid falling. My hip ached from the cold and my breathing was labored by the time I reached the corner. But I made it. The store was exactly as I remembered. A small family-owned market with narrow aisles and a friendly clerk who'd been working there for years. I bought a pack of gum and a greeting card, paying with the $20 bill I kept in my purse for emergencies. This felt like an emergency. The walk back was harder. The cold was seeping through my coat, and my legs felt unsteady on the icy sidewalk. By the time I reached the entrance to Meadowbrook Manor, I was exhausted and shivering. But I'd done it. The lobby erupted when I walked through the doors. Staff members materialized from every direction, their faces a mixture of relief and anger. Someone wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. Someone else was already on the phone. Someone was demanding to know where I'd been, how I'd left the building, whether I was hurt. I was triumphant. I went to the store, I announced, pulling the pack of gum from my purse like a trophy. I walked there, I bought something, and I walked back. By myself. I did it by myself. But instead of the pride I expected to feel, I saw only fear and frustration in the faces around me. Instead of admiration for my independence, I heard lectures about safety and responsibility and the liability issues I'd created for the facility. They weren't proud of me. They were angry with me. Carol appeared with a wheelchair, insisting that I needed to be examined by the on-call physician. Jennifer was already filling out an incident report. The facility director was being summoned to discuss enhanced security measures. Enhanced security measures. As they wheeled me to the medical office, I realized that my moment of freedom had actually made my situation worse. I'd proven that I was capable of independent action, but instead of convincing them to trust me more, I'd convinced them to watch me more closely. I'd played right into their fears. That evening when Sarah arrived, her face was pale with worry and tight with anger. "Mom, what were you thinking?" she said, sitting down heavily in the chair beside my bed. "You could have been killed. You could have fallen on the ice. You could have gotten lost. You could have frozen to death. I could have lived. I walked 3 blocks to a store I've been shopping at for 20 years, I said quietly. I bought gum and came home. That's what normal people do every day. But you're not normal people, Mom. You're 73 years old. You have mobility issues. You're on medications that affect your balance and judgment. I'm on medications that affect my balance and judgment because you put me here. Sarah, I proved today that I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. I made a plan, I executed it safely, and I came back. If anything, this should show you that I don't need to be here." Sarah stared at me for a long moment and I could see her struggling with something. Love, fear, frustration, exhaustion. Or maybe just the realization that her mother wasn't going to go quietly. Dr. Patterson wants to see you tomorrow, she said finally. And the facility director wants to meet with all of us to discuss options. That night, lying in my bed with the sound of increased security rounds echoing in the hallway, I realized that my act of defiance had backed everyone into a corner. I'd forced them to acknowledge that I was still capable of independent action, but I'd also forced them to acknowledge that they couldn't control me. And they didn't like feeling out of control. Frank found me the next morning during breakfast. "I heard about your adventure yesterday," he said quietly, settling into the chair next to mine. "How do you feel?" "Trapped. Like I proved something important," I said. "But not to the people who needed to see it." Frank nodded, understanding immediately. "They can't let you be right," he said. "If you're right, if you're capable of independence, then everything they've built their authority on falls apart. The entire system depends on my helplessness. So what do I do now?" Frank glanced around the dining room, making sure no one was listening. "Now you get serious about leaving," he said. "Because after yesterday, they're going to make sure you never get another chance to prove them wrong." It was time for my real escape plan. The meeting with Dr. Patterson and the facility director took place on a Friday morning in the small conference room near the administrative offices. Sarah was there looking tired and worried. David was there checking his watch and clearly wishing he could be anywhere else. I was there wearing my best dress and trying to project an image of competence and dignity. I was fighting for my life. Dr. Patterson was a thin, serious man in his 50s who spoke about me as if I weren't in the room. He used phrases like increased risk factors and documented incidents of poor judgment and progression of age-related cognitive decline. Age-related cognitive decline. "Mrs. Hayes has demonstrated a pattern of behavior that suggests she may no longer be capable of making safe decisions about her own care," he said, reading from a file that seemed to contain every moment of my life for the past year. "Yesterday's incident, leaving the facility unsupervised in winter weather, could have resulted in serious injury or death. Yesterday's incident was a walk to the corner store." Mrs. Davidson, the facility director, nodded gravely. "We've had to implement additional security measures," she said. "Door alarms, increased monitoring, more frequent wellness checks. Frankly, Mrs. Hayes, your recent behavior has created liability issues that we're not equipped to handle." Liability issues. I listened to them talk about me, about my future, about what they thought was best for a woman they'd known for less than a year. They discussed medication adjustments, security upgrades, and the possibility of transferring me to a facility with more appropriate resources for residents with behavioral challenges. Behavioral challenges. Finally, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through their professional discussion like a knife. "I'm sitting right here. And I have something to say about my own life." The room went quiet. "Dr. Patterson, you say I have cognitive decline, but I remember every conversation we've had. I remember every medication you've prescribed and every side effect I've experienced. I remember the names of every staff member who's cared for me, every meal I've eaten, and every day I've spent in this place." I was thinking clearly. "Mrs. Davidson, you say I'm a liability, but I've never been injured in your facility. I've never caused damage to property or harm to other residents. My only crime is wanting to make my own decisions about my own life. My only crime is wanting to live. And Sarah," I said, turning to my daughter, "you say you're doing this out of love, but love doesn't lock people up. Love doesn't take away choices. Love doesn't reduce a human being to a problem that needs to be managed. Love lets people be free." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, we're trying to keep you safe." "Safe from what?" I asked. "Safe from living? Safe from making mistakes? Safe from being human? Safe from being me?" I stood up from my chair, feeling steadier and more determined than I had in months. "I want to go home," I said simply. "I want to live in my own house, make my own decisions and take responsibility for my own life. If that means I might fall down or get confused or make mistakes, then so be it. Those are my mistakes. Those are my risks to take." Dr. Patterson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hayes, with all due respect, that's not really your decision to make anymore. Your daughter has power of attorney for your healthcare decisions, and based on my professional assessment, I cannot recommend independent living." Power of attorney. The words hit me like a physical blow. I turned to Sarah, searching her face for some explanation, some sign that I'd misunderstood. When? I whispered. Sarah's face crumpled. After Dad died, she said quietly. You were so grief-stricken, so overwhelmed. You asked me to help you with the paperwork, the bills, the medical decisions. You said you trusted me to take care of everything. I'd signed away my right to choose. But I never said you could lock me up, I said, my voice getting stronger. I never said you could decide where I live and what medications I take and whether I can walk to the corner store. I never said you could erase me. Mom, the power of attorney is for your protection. It means that when you're not thinking clearly, I'm thinking clearly right now. I shouted and everyone in the room jumped. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. And what I'm thinking is that I've made the biggest mistake of my life by trusting all of you to make decisions for me. The biggest mistake of my life. Mrs. Davidson was making notes on her legal pad, probably documenting my behavioral outburst for the official record. Dr. Patterson was watching me with the detached interest of a scientist observing a lab rat. David was staring at his hands, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional intensity of the scene. Grocery delivery if needed and regular check-ins from family or friends. She's not asking to live in isolation. She's asking to live with dignity. Dignity. And if we refuse? Sarah asked quietly. Then we go to court, Patricia said simply. And based on the evidence we have, I'm confident that a judge will restore Mrs. Hayes' right to make her own decisions. I was prepared to fight. But I didn't have to. 2 weeks later, Sarah called and asked if she could take me to lunch. Somewhere outside the facility, somewhere we could talk privately. She was ready to listen. We went to a small cafe near the downtown area, a place with big windows and comfortable chairs and the kind of normal, everyday atmosphere I'd been craving for more than a year. Felt like coming back to life. Mom, Sarah said after we'd ordered our food, I've been thinking about what you said in Patricia's office. About loving you enough to let you make your own choices. She'd been listening. I realized that somewhere along the way I stopped seeing you as my mother and started seeing you as my responsibility, she continued. I stopped thinking about what you wanted and started focusing on what I thought you needed. He stopped seeing me as a person. I was so scared of losing you the way I lost Dad, she said, tears starting to flow. I thought if I could just control everything, if I could just keep you safe enough, I could prevent anything bad from happening. But bad things were already happening. Sarah, I said, reaching across the table to take her hand, the worst thing that could happen to me isn't falling down or getting sick or even dying. The worst thing is disappearing while I'm still alive. The worst thing is becoming invisible. She squeezed my hand tightly. I know that now, she said. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. She was ready to let me go. The transition back to independence took another month. I had to prove to myself as much as to everyone else that I could handle the practical aspects of living alone. Patricia helped me set up support services. A cleaning lady named Rosa who came every Thursday, a grocery delivery service, and a medical alert system that would summon help if I needed it. I was building a safety net that didn't feel like a cage. Frank was instrumental in helping me prepare for the move. We spent hours planning how I would manage everything from taking medications to dealing with emergencies. He even offered to be my emergency contact, understanding that sometimes the people who love us most aren't the best people to handle our crises. He understood the difference between love and control. On the day I left Meadowbrook Manor, I felt like I was being released from prison. I packed my belongings into boxes and suitcases, said goodbye to the staff who had cared for me, and hugged Frank tight. Thank you for helping me remember who I am, I whispered. Sarah drove me home, to my real home, the house I'd shared with Richard for 30 years. When she unlocked the front door and I stepped inside, the smell hit me first. The faint scent of the lavender sachets I'd kept in the linen closets, the lingering aroma of coffee from the kitchen, the indefinable smell of a place where people had lived and loved and been happy. Smelled like home. The house had been maintained in my absence. Sarah had made sure of that. But it felt different. Smaller somehow and quieter. The silence wasn't the institutional silence of Meadowbrook Manor. It was the peaceful silence of a place where I could think my own thoughts and make my own choices. It was the silence of freedom. That first night, I sat in my own kitchen at my own table and ate a simple dinner I'd prepared myself. Just scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy, but it tasted like the most delicious meal I'd ever eaten. Tasted like a choice. After dinner, I called Patricia to let her know I was settled in safely. Then I called Frank to thank him again for his help. Then I sat in Richard's chair in the living room and just breathed. I was home. The first few weeks were challenging in ways I hadn't expected. I'd grown used to having my days structured by other people, and suddenly having complete control over my time felt almost overwhelming. I could eat breakfast at 6 in the morning or at noon. I could stay up until midnight reading or go to bed at 8 o'clock. I could spend an entire day in my pajamas if I wanted to, or get dressed up just to walk to the mailbox. I could be myself. Sarah visited often during those early weeks, clearly struggling with her own anxiety about my independence. She'd call before coming over, which was new. She'd ask if I needed anything instead of assuming what I needed, which was also new. She was learning to see me as an adult again. "How are you feeling, Mom?" she asked during one of her visits about a month after I'd moved back home. "Alive. Like myself again," I said honestly. "It's scary sometimes being responsible for everything. But it's also wonderful. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have choices. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be human." "I know I don't say this enough," Sarah said, "but I'm proud of you. For fighting for what you wanted. For not giving up. For refusing to disappear." 6 months after leaving Meadowbrook Manor, I got a letter from Frank. He'd finally decided to pursue his own legal challenge to his living situation, inspired by my success. His family was resistant, but he'd found his own lawyer and was determined to try. Freedom is contagious. A year after my return home, I started volunteering with Patricia's law firm, helping other elderly people who were trying to regain control of their own lives. I'd become something of an expert on navigating the legal system, and I discovered that my experience at Meadowbrook Manor had given me a unique perspective on the challenges facing people in my situation. My imprisonment had become my qualification to help others escape. There are still difficult days. Days when I feel overwhelmed by the responsibility of taking care of myself. Days when I wonder if Sarah was right, if I would be safer in a controlled environment. Days when I miss the simplicity of having other people make decisions for me. But I don't miss being invisible. I'm 75 now, 2 years older than when I first walked through the doors of Meadowbrook Manor. My arthritis is worse, my energy is lower, and I move more slowly than I used to. These are the practical realities of aging that Sarah was so worried about. But I'm still me. I still wake up in my own bed in the room I shared with Richard. I still make my own coffee in the kitchen where we ate breakfast together for 30 years. I still tend to the garden where his ashes are scattered beneath the rose bushes. I still get to choose. Last week I fell in the bathroom. Not seriously, just a stumble that left me with a bruised knee and a wounded pride. For about 10 minutes, lying on the bathroom floor waiting for the shock to wear off, I thought about how much easier my life would be if I just accepted that other people knew what was best for me. For about 10 minutes I considered surrender. Then I got up, assessed the damage, and called my doctor to make sure I hadn't injured anything important. I chose to handle my own crisis, make my own decisions about whether I needed medical attention, and take responsibility for my own well-being. I chose to remain human. Sarah doesn't know about the fall. Not because I'm hiding it from her, but because it wasn't serious.